As you know, this is our third Sunday in the Distinguished Pulpit series here at Mayflower, and this morning we are honored to have Sheryl Siddiqui as our speaker. Sheryl is Chairperson for the Islamic Council of Oklahoma, board member of the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice, and on the Board and Speakers Bureau of the Islamic Society of Tulsa. Sheryl is a woman devoted to family and community. We are honored to have you as our guest, Sheryl. Thank you so much for being here. Please help me welcome Sheryl Siddiqui.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be back. I'm so thrilled that you heard me once and you allowed me to come back. That's forgiveness. As you may remember, whenever I start something, I do a little bit of education and focus myself. Whenever a Muslim starts anything, they start out by saying either silently to themselves or out loud, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's Arabic, and it means, I begin in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. And I start that way, hoping God will guide me through it, forgive any shortcomings in it, and make only good things happen from it. Given that this is a sermon, I want to, of course, say that I don't give sermons, but I'd be happy to talk with you. But the focus of my talk really is to bring us all together, to remind us, myself and all of us in the room, that we are all God's people. And while we might dress differently and see God a little bit differently, we are still the ones He created. And there are many others out there that have been driven to points of fear. And some of them may be in your families or your neighborhoods. And this may be an opportunity for you to do some good. And it's an opportunity for me to be a partner in your goodness. With Robin Myers as your head pastor and your exposure to his good friend Imam Imad and Shasi, I am confident that your congregation is more knowledgeable than most, especially in Oklahoma, when it comes to Islamic teachings and values. And I don't know if any of you know, but how many of you know Chris Moore from this congregation? Yes? He's now my mother's pastor. See what good this congregation is doing? Many of you have stood in solidarity with Muslims at all kinds of events and on many different issues. And for that, I thank you sincerely. You know, sometimes the only way we can get things done is in collaboration. And it's so important for us to have those coalitions, because if only one group is complaining, others will say, sour grapes. But when we come together, then that's taken off the table, and people have to deal with us all in a better fashion. When I asked for recommendations for today, I was advised that you might appreciate having information to correct some of the myths, lies, and stereotypes about Islam and Muslims that you might share with some of these folks who have become fearful or they've become brainwashed. And I'm hoping that, I'm not really asking you to do the jobs Muslims should have been doing more of over the last few years, but I will. And I'm going to say, but it's not just your job or my job, it's all of our jobs as American citizens and as believers, right? That we educate the people around us when we have access to what is true and we know what is wrong in a situation. None of us knows everything, so we have to educate each other. So as citizens and believers, I'm hoping that you will work with me to help everyone acknowledge the opportunity that they have, that they should be empowered in this country, that they should speak for themselves in this wonderful marketplace for ideas, that as your focus this morning is on listening, that we will listen to each other, and where we help everyone understand that we will judge each other according to their actions, not their skin color, their religion, their orientation, or their immigration status. Right? And before I start, let me tell you a true story. You say, she hasn't started yet? Oh my God, she's going to go 11:30. No, but I want to share this story with you. An ophthalmologist I happen to know, my son, treated a man who had been told that there was no help for his vision. So my son, giving the second opinion, told the man, I think we can help you. And so my son did the surgery, and when the patient came back a few days later, he said, thanks, doc, now I can see the target. And so my son said, well, just don't shoot me, laughingly. And the patient said, you're not Muslim, you don't have to worry. My son, fortunately, who rarely says anything, this is one of the quietest men on the face of the earth, he said, "Oh, but I am." And the man's jaw just dropped to the floor. Now, my son had a choice. He could have said nothing and let this man go on with his stereotype of Muslims. But my son, courageously, I think, because you never know what's going to happen, he corrected the man's misinformation and opened his eyes just the tiniest little bit. Figuratively, yeah. Puns intended. Puns intended. I couldn't resist. So let's start with some reliable sources about Islam and then also take some of the myths so that then you're armed and dangerous with some better stuff, okay? The resources that I would refer you to, reliable sources, are National Public Radio, love it. OETA, absolutely. BBC, absolutely. Christian Science Monitor, go for it. Huffington Post, HuffPost Online, absolutely. Politico.com. Carla Hinton, you all know Carla Hinton, right? Yeah. She writes for your Oklahoma newspaper, the religion pages. Listen to her. She's amazing. Dr. Charles Kimball, who you probably know, and Dr. Joshua Landis at OU. These are all great resources. For those of you who live online, as some of the people in my family, whyislam.org, the Council on American Islamic Relations. Some of you might know Adam Sultani, who's the executive director for Oklahoma's CARE office, and discoverislam.com. Those are reliable sources. But the absolute best that I can refer you to for people who are really horrified about what they're reading in the headlines and what their preachers, not pastors, their preachers are telling them about Islam and Muslims, best. There's an article online that you can find that is, you can Google 120 Muslim scholars, or you can Google a letter to Baghdadi. You know who Baghdadi is, right? Head of ISIS, yeah, public enemy number one, sure. These 120 Muslim scholars basically school Baghdadi on why his statements, the actions of ISIS, and everything that they're promoting is wrong categorically and chapter and verse. So there's an executive one-page summary, easiest read, and man, it'll open your eyes. And then the next 23 pages are all the proofs, Islamic proofs by these respected scholars from all over the world. So you can't just say, well, no, that's one cultural interpretation. No. These are the big guys, and they're all agreeing that, ISIS is so far wrong. So that's one best source. And the other really good source, some of you might have already seen because it was on TV, the documentary, Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think. And I'll talk about that some more in a minute. But that's a YouTube video that you can now watch, and it's also a book for those who you prefer to read. And then I would say, please run away from network news when it comes to information about Islam. And I'm not saying networks are bad. There's probably a lot of good going on there. I personally also tune in. But when it comes to Islam, my experience with networks is that the people who are reporting the news to us have never taken a comparative religions class. They've never taken a class specifically on Islam, and yet they're reporting on it every single day. How can they possibly convey to you what's going on and put it into historical context or religious context? They can't. So for that reason, I would ask you to be careful of what you're catching from network news, but absolutely when it comes to Islam, stay as far away from FOX news as you can, right? We love our local Fox affiliate. They're wonderful. They cover our stories and they're super. But National Fox is really dangerous when it comes to Islam and Muslims. They may get everything else right. I don't know, I won't pretend to know about those, but I know about Islamic teachings. And they're way off. Wall Street Journal makes me nervous. Representative Bennett, you can imagine, you've already heard, he's got his approval for his interim study on radical Islam. And as far as he's concerned, every Muslim is a radical. And Representative King from New York, same thing. These are, in my mind, dangerous people because not only they don't have enough correct information, but they're spreading misinformation to people who don't know any better. So what have we learned from these folks that are out in the public square, the myths, lies, and stereotypes about Islam? That violence is Islam's modus operandi. That's a problem. And it's a problem for me for many reasons. But what we see in the Muslim world is, of course, violence. But what we have to look past the headlines to see is, do you remember the purple thumbs, purple fingers? What was the Arab Spring all about? People trying to get democracy, right? They wanted to be empowered in their own political systems because that's Islamic teaching. Not dictatorship, not authoritarian government. That's against Islamic teachings. Not having royal families. Royal families are against Islamic teachings. It's a government that's consultative, a government of the people, where the people advise the government. So this concept that that Islam is violence, if we're only reading the news, then we're going to miss what Islam is really about. We do see, of course, vigilantes, not only Muslim vigilantes, but of course we've seen many others. God protect our police and law enforcement right now. We need to take these situations very, very seriously. We have civil wars to relieve oppression. We have the Arab Spring. We have outside attacks in some countries, like Russia, of course, dominated and kept attacking Afghanistan for so long. Then the Americans went in and killed a few thousand more people, and all in the name of our values, but at their cost. And so now we're seeing, Iraq being without a government. This is not just one group's fault. Lots and lots of people had a hand in this. But what we're seeing and what people are judging is we're judging the victims for what lots of people have done, right? So we need to be praying for those people and helping them in the ways that we can. There's an Iranian tradition that says, bad government is better than no government, but it continues, but everyone should work towards a more just government. How true, right? The rogue vigilantes we've seen, Anders Breivik in Norway, killed 70 kids at summer camp. They were Muslim kids. He so believed the rhetoric that he was hearing from leaders in his own country, that Islam was bad, that Muslims are of the devil and that kind of stuff, that he felt that he had to take action. And we're seeing the Dallas police shooter, again, who had heard so much rhetoric, he really felt that he had to do something. Timothy McVeigh thought the American government had done something so horrible, he thought that he had to take action. Omar Mateen, down in Orlando, thought that people were so misguided that he had to take action. The Tsarnaev brothers, had heard so much from the people around them. Even though they're raised in America, they heard things and they felt like they had to take action. Muslims, because we're watching what's going on in other places, we are incredibly vigilant about what's going on in our own mosques and among the people who we associate with. I hope you'll be the same, because obviously, as I've mentioned from this list, Muslims don't have a corner on that market. Vigilantism and extremism is all around us. And given the current American political climate, it's not going to wind down anytime soon. Well, I wish it would, God, please. But when we look at these same folks, how many of them have violent or troubled pasts? Almost all of them, right? So I want to go back and I mentioned the Gallup poll, Who Speaks for Islam. That was a 6-year study where 50,000 face-to-face interviews were done in 35 countries. And one of the questions that they asked all these Muslims was, is democracy compatible with Islam? And the study suggested yes. In fact, it said many Muslims favor religious principles and democratic rights together, right? As a Christian here in America, you live an American Christian life, right? You live by your values and you abide by the law. Muslims are doing the same thing here in America, and that's what Muslims are trying to do all over the world. These same people were asked, if it was your job to draft a hypothetical constitution for your country, what would be the most important defining characteristics of this government? You're not gonna, I didn't believe it when I saw it, so you're smarter than I am though. First, they said freedom of speech. Second, freedom of religion. Third, freedom of assembly. Fourth, rule of law. And fifth, transparency in government. Wow, what did they just describe? And people think they're against America as they keep applying for visas to come here? No wonder, right? And in fact, for that very reason, so many American Muslims define America as the most Islamic country in the world. So when they talk about Sharia, when these same people in the study were asked about Sharia, the study report says, while favoring religious principle, most Muslims do not favor rule by religious clerics. They'd rather be ruled by secular people, because we don't need other people to tell us what God thinks. We can figure that out for ourselves, right? Amen. Thank you. So when we're looking at Sharia, let's look at Sharia on the ground here. I said, America is the most Islamic country, according to so many Muslims. When we look at violence in this country, and we look at violence around the world, when we look at what Islam is teaching Muslims, is it teaching violence? Well, let's look at some proofs. The proof here is that in the Tulsa area, over 90,000 Tulsans, most of whom had religious teachings at some point in their lives, or maybe their whole life, 90,000 Tulsans at some point in their life will depend on a Muslim for their medical care. Sound violent to you? Violence wasn't a part of their curriculum. Saving life. In Islam, saving life takes precedent over all other rulings, even when it comes to fighting for justice. If there's a way that we can minimize it, the loss of life, or if we can prevent it completely through treaties and bringing in leverage and other kinds of techniques, that we are to do those first. My understanding is there are even more Muslim doctors in the Oklahoma City area than there are in Tulsa, so your numbers might be 150 or 200,000 Oklahoma City folks who are under a medical care of a Muslim. The Muslim-run food pantries in Oklahoma City and Tulsa feed hundreds of Oklahoma's people of different spiritual paths. And our Muslim-run shelters in Oklahoma City and Tulsa are helping women and children in crisis, again, regardless of faith. Doesn't sound like violence is the priority to me, but you can decide for yourselves. The actual numbers of Americans going to ISIS, it's a hard number to find, but one that I did find from a reliable source is about 145 currently there. And of course, people want to say, and some media outlets will tell you, oh, they're thrill seekers or the men and women who are looking to add meaning to their lives. But what the FBI and the CIA are both telling us very consistently is there is no one profile of somebody who goes over to ISIS. Some of them were born with a silver spoon, with the best educations, top of their class, and they go over. All of a sudden, somebody flips a switch and they go over to join this crazy group, right? Others have lived lives of deprivation, and they go over. And everything in between. People born here, raised here, go. People born overseas, raised here, go. Born, raised overseas, lived here briefly, go. There's no one pattern, no one profile for the people going to ISIS. Again, I tell you, Muslims are very vigilant, and we work with the FBI and law enforcement very closely. It's our security just like it's yours. But of course, our big concern is, what about the one that comes back with the bomb, right? Just like Timothy McVeigh was known to so many people. Nobody really thought he would ever do something that crazy. And with Muslims, we are probably always erring on the side of caution. Thank you so much. Thank you. So another one of the big myths is that we plan to take over and impose Sharia. By Islamic teachings, it tells us that we should live by the laws of the land where we live. Okay, I live here. I should abide by American law. So can I impose Sharia on everybody? Well, no. Number one, Sharia is for Muslims the way kosher law is for Jews. So it wouldn't do you any good. But secondly, if I have to live by the laws of this land, and the U.S. Constitution says, Article 6, Clause 2, this Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land, and judges in every state shall be bound thereby, well, you're safe, right? Because our religion's telling us we have to abide by the law, and the law is saying it's the supreme law. Cool. When Muslims say that America is the most Islamic country in the world, they're looking at what Sharia teaches us. The Sharia values or areas of law, just like American law has, civil law and traffic law and international law, there's family law, all these different kinds. In Sharia, there are 5 areas of law. One is about freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. Hey, we've got that here in the United States. We can practice, we can preach, but we have to respect others. Well, according to Islam, we do too. Second, sanctity of life. Islam teaches we have to protect life. I told you that was the overarching rule in all things, right? And same thing here in America. If I call 911, the authorities will send somebody, right? Everyone is equal before the law. Oppression is illegal. Fairness is the goal. Well, sure enough, that's American law as well. Property rights. Islamically, we can't mess with anybody else's property without their permission. We can't sell it, we can't destroy it, we can't do anything to it, right? Same thing here in America. We call 911 when somebody's messing with our property, and the authorities will send somebody. According to Islam, education, sanity, competency, and intellectual property rights are all to be protected. And oh, by the way, we happen to have all those protections here in America. And the one thing that American law doesn't have that Sharia does promote is the concept that the individual has a right to know who their people are, and that every decision should be made with a long-term view towards the progeny. The reason that Muslims don't really heckle with this is because there's a workaround, so we don't have to change the law here. And it especially applies to when you adopt a child. By Islamic law, you can't change that child's last name if it's known. That child has a right to know who his or her people are. Doesn't mean they have to raise them, doesn't mean they have to do anything for them, but the child has the right to know who they are. Here in America, a child can apply and keep applying to find ways to find out who their family is. The third of the big myths out there is that Islam oppresses women. It's not Islam that oppresses women, it's people that oppress women. People like the Taliban, ISIS, Boko Haram, the Saudi government, and some people in rural Oklahoma, and some people in the cities, and some people, right? And you know how people tend to, birds of a feather gather? So people who like oppressing, men who like oppressing their wives are going to hang out together so that they can all lean on their wives together, right? And the women will stick together because misery loves company. But Islam doesn't promote that. And God gives us so much information in the Quran to tell us how to deal with it, that it's a real problem for us as we see it continuing. One of the things that many Muslims who don't read their Quran and read the story of Prophet Muhammad, they don't know that Prophet Muhammad himself promoted women's rights against a very strong lobby of slave owners and sex traders and patriarchs like some of these folks we've just mentioned here in this country. And that was 1,400 years ago. Looks like human nature hasn't changed much. We still have sex traders. We still have a slave trade. We call it different things. But the outcome is basically the same. But Prophet Muhammad empowered the women. He ensured their education. He ensured that he educated people so that there would be respect for women within the family and within the community. He gave them a voice and he gave them a vote within the community. And beyond that, the Quran respects women's rights, protects women's rights, and tells people to ensure their well-being. And honor killing is absolutely against the religion. Vast, vast majority of scholars say this, and many so-called Muslim countries or Muslim majority countries have laws because it's become a problem. The fourth and last one that I'd like to mention is a myth that I'd like to mention is that Islam denies Jesus. And actually, the truth of the matter is that not only is Jesus, according to the Quran, the Word of God, he is the Word of God. He is the Messiah, the Anointed One. His prophethood is extolled to us in the Quran. His miracles and his example and guidance are all elaborated on in a very big way in the Quran. So you heard me say Jesus is a prophet in Islam. He is beloved, we follow him, and we look forward to his return. We're told that his second coming is a time when all the believers, all the people who believe in God and glorify God's name, will all come together and follow Jesus in prayer. So while we don't call him God the way many Christians do, he is absolutely a very important part of our lives. But so is his mother Mary, and even his disciples are praised in the Quran, in the Holy Quran. So what can we do together? Well, first of all, I'd like to appreciate the work you've done again and encourage you to keep up the admirable and blessed work that you are already doing, standing in solidarity with the targets of the day, whether they're Muslims, gays, police, immigrants. The list is ever growing. God forgive us and protect us. And I hope that you'll say something, like my son happened to be in the right place at the right time to say something that opens somebody's eyes. Seems so innocuous, right? But there are consequences. One time I mentioned to somebody on one of my committees that I'm just going to be the slave driver on this one. I'm going to push everybody really hard. And this man said, if you use that term again in my presence, I'll drop my presence from the board. Well, that's what it took to get my attention. I'm from New England. We can use words like that there, and it doesn't hurt people's feelings, and it doesn't take them down to depression. But here in Oklahoma, that's not true, and especially in Tulsa with the history of the race riot, that's a really loaded word. That man did me a favor. That wake-up call changed how I see things and made me more sensitive to an awful lot more people than just him. So when you have the opportunity, I encourage you. It didn't hurt me a bit, it helped me a lot. Do it. Do it. Even if it means you have to unfriend somebody or threaten to unfriend somebody on Facebook. Or as my friend did, threaten to end a conversation or end a relationship. Hopefully this quick reminder of the Islamic perspective on violence, Sharia, women, and Jesus will give you the confidence in your own friendships with Muslims that we aren't the boogeyman that Representative Bennett and Act for America and some of our presidential candidates have said, and that we remind ourselves that it is because of our faiths that we are such good partners in God's work on earth. I mean, after all, where else than Oklahoma can a Muslim neonatologist like my husband perform a bris, the Jewish ritual of circumcision of a boy, perform it in a Catholic hospital and no one thinks it's a big deal? May God guide us, forgive us, bring us ever closer to Him and to each other. Thank you for this opportunity. Good afternoon.